Morning. I'm so glad to be here with you today. I'm going to talk slowly and look to you all in the room and you all on Zoom to let me know if anything about my audio and visuals aren't working. But I'm really glad that you guys were able to invite me here and to run this as a hybrid event since I'm not able to travel to California this week. So thank you for that. Thank you for the nice introduction. Just for anyone who's not familiar with children's advocacy centers or forensic interviewers, I just want to give a little bit of my background and how I come to this work and talking about online exploitation. Doing child forensic interviews means that I was interviewing children ages 2 to 17 in partnership with local and federal police as well as child protective services. Some of those kids, a lot of them were victims of child sexual abuse. Hands-on abuse in their homes or in other places, but some of them were victims of online enticement, child sex trafficking, those kinds of cases as well. So really, I think a lot about the intersections around those types of victimizations and the connection between real-world safety, abuse prevention, and online exploitation safety. I'm only going to be talking for about 30 minutes today, so I'm going to just be touching on a lot of different things, so bear with me and definitely keep those questions coming if there are things that are not clear or things that spark additional questions for you, of course. So give me just a minute to pull up. I have a presentation for you all. I'm hoping you all are seeing a big blue screen at this point. Yell at me in the chat if you are not. So I want to just give you a little bit of sketch of what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, knowing that some of you may or may not be familiar with us already. I'm going to talk about our cyber tip line and some of the data and the emerging trends that we're seeing here at the National Center, as well as some relevant research. We're going to dive in a little bit on sextortion, on sexting, which are some of the trends that we're really seeing and talking about a lot here at the National Center. And I do want to make sure that I'm leaving enough time to talk about prevention. Some of the tools that are available to you, some of our resources also around removing content online and other training and resources that are available. So that's a brief outline of our 30 minutes together. So I do always want to start when I'm talking to people like you all who think deeply about child exploitation, child sex trafficking, other really difficult topics. I first want to reassure you, we are going to talk about things like child sexual abuse material, so images and videos of that are explicit and sexually abusive online. I'm not going to show any of that imagery today, so I want to be really clear about that. But we are, of course, going to be talking about the topic. I'm going to give you some statistics. We're going to talk about some of the things that happen to kids online, which can be difficult to hear, and especially, you guys have just been talking about how heavy this conference is in general. So I just want to open up space to say you never know how any of this is going to impact you. Especially, I find talking about internet safety, a lot of us will think about that topic related to our own kids. In fact, actually, I'd love, if I can see the room well enough, I'd love to kind of ask those of you in the room and then those of you on Zoom can raise your virtual hands. How many of you, when you saw the schedule for today and saw that we were going to be talking about online exploitation, maybe you anticipate we're going to talk about sexting, sextortion, those kind of topics, how many of you came here today thinking, I'm so glad I'm going to this session because what I really want to know and think about is the kids in my life, my own kids. I have teenagers at home, I have middle schoolers at home, my friends have kids, I've got nieces and nephews. So I see lots of hands in the room, I see some hands on the Zoom. I know for a lot of us, we are thinking about both of those roles that we carry, right? We are professionals who are trying to help and just at various levels and various roles keep kids safe. We are also people who have children in our own lives, right? And so we're going to be talking about both of those things, and I think because of that, sometimes this topic can be especially heavy and kind of difficult to sit with. So I want to take time to acknowledge that. As Dr. Morgan said in my introduction, I spent a long time working in child protection, and so I'm very passionate about allowing time, anytime a group of us is gathered together to say that we do need to take care of ourselves. It's also incumbent on organizations to do things to mitigate the harm that exposure to this kind of material does to people who work in the field. So I just want to offer, first of all, if you need to step out, you need to walk away from your computer, none of that's going to offend me. You should do what you need to do to take care of yourself, but beyond that, I hope that you are availing yourself of resources around vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress. So I just want to always allow a little bit of time for that before we dive in. So I am from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. You can see here. We are a child protection organization. We've been around, we're about to celebrate 40 years coming up this year. And we really pride ourselves in being a resource center for anyone who wants to keep kids safe. That could be professionals, that can be parents, that could be school teachers, that can be people who are survivors and victims themselves. We have resources for them directly, and caregivers of those kids as well. So just a whole spectrum from prevention to intervention to treatment. And you see here our mission statement that keeps us working every day is we believe every child deserves a safe childhood. So I'm going to show at the end some of our training resources. I just want to emphasize again, this is 30 minutes. We could talk for a very long time about the array of resources we have. I'm not going to have time to go into most of them. So I would definitely encourage you, we've got a resource table today. My colleague Tina Bigdelli will be presenting tomorrow, and she'll be here with materials tomorrow as well. So go check those out, visit our website, take some of our trainings. This is just going to be a little small subset of the work that the National Center does. So we're talking about internet safety. The first thing we need to do is to understand what we're trying to prevent, what we're trying to help kids stay safe from. So we're going to talk a little bit about online exploitation. And some of the experience that we as the National Center bring to this work is that we run something called the Cyber Tip Line. I hope that's familiar to many of you. This is a program we're authorized to run by Congress where we receive reports of suspected online child sexual abuse. And this is a list from that legislation of the kinds of reports that we can receive. At the top of the list, you'll see child sexual abuse material. This is what we used to call child pornography. It is sometimes called child pornography, especially in the context of criminal law, because that's still what it is in most of the criminal statutes. But we want, whenever we can, to change this language and call it child sexual abuse material. We very much believe child pornography is not a good title for that type of content, which really is film and videos and images of children who have been sexually abused. So we believe child sexual abuse material is a more accurate description of that content, and we are definitely advocating for changing that language wherever we can and continuing to work towards always using that term of CSAM, which you may hear me say today, or child sexual abuse material. That is far and away the category of reports we get the most of in the Cyber Tip Line. And I will show you some data about how many reports we get into the Cyber Tip Line. And I want to be really clear that about 99% of those reports are suspected CSAM. So that is the vast majority of what's reported to us. The second category you see here, it says online enticement of children for sexual acts. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about what that is. But online enticement is any time an adult is communicating with a child on the internet. And the goal of that communication is to commit some kind of sexual offense or even an abduction of that child. In that category, that broad category of online enticement, which really could encapsulate lots of different interactions, lots of different kinds of victimization. One category of that is sextortion, which we are going to talk more about today. And then you see on that list, we do receive reports of child sex trafficking to the Cyber Tip Line. And again, I have a short amount of time. I'm not going to be talking about our programs and services around child sex trafficking, but I do think it's important to mention that we have folks here who help law enforcement and social services directly with cases of child sex trafficking. There's a lot of different analytical and other case services we can offer. So if you work those cases and you're not aware of the National Center, I definitely would invite you to become more familiar with our resources. This is just to show you, kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about when I talk about the Cyber Tip Line. So a Cyber Tip Line report can be made by anyone. It can be made by a child, it can be made by a parent, it can be made by a community member who just comes across child exploitation or something they're worried is child exploitation on the internet. We get a lot of reports from law enforcement. We also get a lot of reports from the internet safety platforms themselves. Those reports come to us, our analysts look at it, they figure out, is this something where, from what I'm seeing here reported, there might be a child who is in imminent danger, there's someone abusing a child, and that child we believe may be in that home with that person. That would be a high priority call, which might involve, calling and waking up a law enforcement entity in the middle of the night to go out and assess that situation. There are other, and then there might be another report where we get an image reported Cyber Tip Line, and it's one we've seen before. We have ways of keeping track of images that we've seen and organizing them for law enforcement. So it could be, we get a report, this is definitely CSAM or child sexual abuse material. This child, we know that these images were created 10 years ago. The child is safe now, but we can still take that information, process it, give it back to law enforcement so that they can help further an investigation or help that victim access restitution. So there's kind of different reports and responses, but our main role is to take information wherever it comes and kind of put it together, organize it, and give it back up to law enforcement. And law enforcement, of course, is responsible for investigating and intervening in cyber tip line reports when that's needed. But this kind of just shows you how that workflow works, so you understand what we're talking about. So to dive in on the data, I don't know how well you can see this from, so I'll read it out. In 2023, the cyber tip line received 36.2 million reports. That's a lot of reports to the cyber tip line. It's a really big number to kind of grasp. Again, 99% of that was child sexual abuse material, suspected child sexual abuse material. In those reports, there were more than 105 million files, images as well as videos. So we're talking about a massive amount of information that the National Center is getting every day, every year about what's happening to kids. And it's from that we're going to create our prevention and our training materials that I'm going to share with you today. That large number of reports to the cyber tip line in 2023 represents an increase, and we have been seeing increases year over year to the cyber tip line. One thing I want to say about that is that, it's obviously bad news that there are so many reports of suspected child exploitation being reported to the National Center, but I don't think this increase is entirely bad news, because another way, one of the reasons I think we're seeing an increase is increased awareness of what's going on online, people reporting more because they're more aware of the issue, and importantly, technology. Internet safety platforms are only required to report known child sexual abuse material to us, but many platforms are proactive in how they look for this material. The technology is getting better to assess the identifying information of known CSAM that we're able to provide and find that material proactively, to look at chats between users and identify harmful or exploitative conversations and other content. And so I think some of this increase is also because technology is getting better and we're able to avail ourselves of that on kind of the good guy side, as well as increased awareness. But the bottom line is there's still obviously a lot of exploitation of children that is available and circulating on the internet. You see this red arrow on your screen here, that's showing you we have seen, this is showing you just online enticement reports. I had to trim down to half an hour. Usually I have a slide with just reports, and I forgot that I don't have that slide. And what this is showing you here is just reports of online enticement. So what you see here is in 2021, we have 44,000 reports of online enticement, which again is an adult communicating with a child in order to commit a sexual offense. It includes sextortion in that category. We went from 44,000 in 2021 to 80,000 in 2022 to 186,000 in 2023. That is a giant increase, which again, maybe there's some increased awareness and increased reporting, but I do think I'm going to talk about some trends we've seen. There has been a genuine increase in sextortion since spring of 2022 in particular that we have definitely been observing kind of across multiple data points and information sources, but we're definitely seeing it showing up in our cyber tip line reports. But it is also true that the total number of cyber tip line reports has increased year over year for many years as well. So I mentioned sextortion a little bit. I definitely want to spend a little bit of time talking about this. Sextortion is a type of blackmail where offenders, it's used by offenders to acquire additional sexual content from a child, or to coerce them in engaging in sexual activity, or to obtain money from the child. So it could be any of those three things. Oftentimes what happens is the child shares an image, nude or partially nude or otherwise explicit image with someone else. That person turns around and says, "You're going to give me more of this imagery, or I'm spreading this image all around school. I'm sending it to your family, I'm sending it to people you go to school with." And that has been happening for a long time. That's definitely a trend we have been seeing for 10 years or more. But what we have been seeing in 2020, starting in 2022 and continuing an upward trend to now, is an increase in what we call financial sextortion. So the last piece of that definition talked about an offender wanting to obtain money from the child, and we are seeing a big increase in those types of sextortion cases, particularly targeting teenage boys. So we're calling it financial sextortion. And this slide gives you a little bit of information. So what we're seeing, we used to see that a lot of our cases where the victims were female, and the goal of the extortion was to obtain additional content. What we're seeing a huge increase and more of being reported, at least to the National Center, financial sextortion, again, targeting teenage boys. So a lot of times what happens is the boy sends an image, an explicit image of their own body, the offender turns around very quickly and asks for money. So these are financially motivated offenses. The primary targets are boys. We have seen victims as young as 9. The FBI has seen victims as young as 9. What's different about this is that sextortion used to move more slowly. It used to be very relational. You're building trust over time. They're building a relationship. Sometimes the victims would feel like they were in a relationship with this person and then send the image, and then the sextortion, the communication would turn and become threatening and around extortion. Now it's much quicker. We've seen cases where the initial contact is here, and several hours later, it's already turned very aggressively to extortion. We saw in 2023 more than 20,000 reports of this type of financial sextortion. And I would also say the threats are more aggressive. They escalate quickly, and they're more sophisticated. I think the way I would explain this to us is just as many of us in the workplace have seen more sophisticated social engineering types of threats, where someone may contact you and mention 2 other coworkers who you really do work with and say something like, oh, we've got a board meeting tomorrow, I want to buy gift cards, or will you please call me on the cell phone, and it's got a lot of information. I've even had ones where there's a coalition I'm a member of, and they had me, the president, and the treasurer, and the secretary on an email, and they wanted to talk about an invoice, and that was a phishing scam or a financial scam. So in the same way that those types of scams have gotten more sophisticated and more trickier to spot or deal with, these have too. So what we see is the offenders do things like they will infiltrate a teen's social network. So the teenager is trying to do some safe things and some due diligence. This person says that they know someone on my soccer team, and here they are friends with 6 of the people on my soccer team, so that seems to track, this seems legitimate. And then when they start to threaten the extortion, they say, I'm going to send this to all your friends, and I know exactly who your friends are, and here I am with an open Snapchat, making that up, but Snapchat is any platform. Here I am waiting in the group chat to send it out immediately. I know exactly who your mother is, I know where she works, and here's her email address, and this is the email address I'm sending your naked picture to. Right now, this is your school, this is your 5th period teacher. I mean, just really scary kinds of threats, and threatening bodily harm, threatening, and going after family members too, as well. And unfortunately, across the country, we have seen some suicides, some deaths by suicide associated with these kinds of cases, kids who have died by suicide very soon after being sextorted in this way. So it's definitely scary. And I'm going to take a pause because I see the message about the technical difficulties.
While we're working on technical difficulties, I thought maybe, Susan, you could answer a couple of questions that have already started coming in, because we do want to see your slides. I'm curious if one of the questions that has already been brought in is, how is NCMEC preparing to respond to AI-generated images? Who is responsible for doing the examination to determine if the image is AI? Oh, and your slides are back. But now I'll let you. Okay. We've got visual now, Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking again.
All right.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep going. Can I start on the slide I was on? I don't know how long you guys couldn't hear me. I'll just keep going. Okay. I'm going to resume, but if you guys have questions about what I covered because you couldn't hear me, just keep those in the chat, and I'm happy to back up and go back over something. So I was talking about financial sextortion. I wanted to share this was a press release that the FBI sent out at the end of 2022, kind of outlining this problem and what they were seeing at the time. They said 7,000 reports, victims 14 to 17, as young as 10. They recently updated this stat to say from October 2021 to March 2023, they've received more than 13,000 reports involving 12,600 victims, primarily boys still, and that they have been able to link at least 20 deaths by suicides to this type of exploitation. So it's definitely a trend that, A, is alarming, but I think also presents an opportunity for us to be talking to our kids, particularly our boys, and just letting them know that this is a thing and that we can support them, and I'm going to share some resources. But I think it's important for us to be aware of kind of what's out there and what that trend is looking like and how much it has changed. This is an article. I think that the link here will work for you to get around the paywall. You can let me know if not. It's from my hometown paper, the Washington Post. Just to show again, there's different data points kind of informing what we think about this and kind of what we're seeing and the fact that this is a trend. This is an article in the parenting section, so not even the tech or some kind of specialized section, just about the fact that teens are being extorted with these types of scams. So this is a helpful resource too to share in your community and with your friends and others just to kind of understand this and what it's looking like to the teenagers who are experiencing it. So I do want to talk about sexting, which is connected to sextortion, but we'll talk about it in a second. I imagine most of you have heard of sexting. Another kind of technical wonky term for it is youth-produced explicit content. I'll use that. There are other words. You can sometimes see self-generated content. You might see self-generated child sexual abuse material or SGCSAM if you read the literature on this. It's all the same thing. It means that the child in the image is the one who took the picture or the video. But I want to be really clear that we tend to look at this behavior we tend to think of it only as consensual sexting between teenagers, which does happen, and is kind of definitely outside of the scope of a 20-minute talk that we have today to really dive into, but that is definitely something that happens. We need to make sure, though, that when we are confronted with a child who has this kind of imagery, especially if it's circulating or they're facing harassment or threats around it, we need to be mindful of the fact that this imagery is also created in the context of online enticement. So someone who is threatening or coercing someone to create that image, it happens in the context of sextortion. And so we don't always know the full story behind the image. We need to be very careful when we're talking to kids who have seen this, who have this imagery circulating, that we don't know the full scope of the circumstances around the creation of the imagery. So I think the last speaker was talking too about how offenders will instruct kids on how to pose and behave in pictures. So you may see something with a kid smiling that looks like it's something they wanted to create. It may not be. And we know, and I know this as a forensic interviewer, I know many of you know this, kids don't always come to us with the whole story when they need help. Sometimes they come with a piece of the story, and we have to be mindful that the bigger picture might be different than what it looks like when we first find out about it. I also think it's important we continue to talk about live streaming and update the ways we talk to kids and not just say, don't send an image, don't post an image, because what some kids may hear is like, oh, well, it might be pretty safe to live stream this kind of content. And we know, and our law enforcement partners will tell you, live streams get recorded sometimes, and you don't always know that they're recorded, and you can't control what happens to that imagery even if it's something that has disappeared or something that was otherwise ephemeral. So we need to make sure we're talking to kids about that. I know I'm short on time, so we're not going to do a whole poll in the room, but I'm going to show you some statistics from a recent meta-analysis of research, which will probably surprise many of you who work with kids and teenagers. And you may feel like all of them are sexting all of the time, every day, but they're not. The research is actually pretty consistent that only about 20% of kids are sending self-produced content. However, more of them receive it, and many of them forward it. And I don't have time to go into this very much, but Tina Big Jelly tomorrow will be able to talk a lot more with you all about this. We have got to talk to kids about the harm that happens when they forward this imagery. We spend a lot of time talking to kids about not producing this imagery, and what we have to do is shift that to also talk to kids about forwarding the imagery, because that's where a lot of the harm comes from. And when we only talk about producing the content, we're putting a lot of blame on victims who have their imagery circulating. And again, we're not going to get a lot into this, but I think we also have to just realize that we live in a world with some very convincing, very sophisticated artificial intelligence that can create this imagery. And so you may have a kid in front of you who didn't even send it, who did listen to your internet safety talk, and is still being victimized. So we have to be very careful to shift our messaging to talk to people about not forwarding this imagery as well. And then this slide, just quickly, if you don't believe me about that 19%, this is a study from Thorne. Tina will be able to talk a lot more about this, but they've done some great research surveying young people. And again, you do see a similar rate when you look at all minors. 18% of kids say that they've shared their own SGC SAM, that's self-generated content. And this is an anonymous internet survey, so probably as close to honest as we can get in research. So I invite you to go to Tina's talk tomorrow and learn more about that. From a prevention standpoint, I don't know if people saw this last year, but the WHO did put out a report on what works to prevent online violence against children. It's very good. It has a lot of excellent recommendations around what we should be doing with internet safety, involving parents and caregivers, role plays, interactivity, trying to find ways to reinforce our content. So we're not just doing an assembly, we're also getting teachers, we're getting parents engaged so kids hear these messages over time. I think most important on here perhaps is that we need to focus on skill building. So not just telling kids, don't send this picture, don't forward this picture, don't talk to strangers on the internet. We need to be focusing on skills. And one great example of this, I think, is working with kids around self-regulation, emotions, impulse control. So two things. One, ability to deal with rejection. Someone is pressuring you to send them a naked picture and you don't want to, and you're not going to send that picture and they're going to break up with you. That's what you're going to have to deal with. And being able to deal with that rejection allows you to put up firmer boundaries. If you are willing to assert boundaries that other people don't like, you're going to be much more able to make safe decisions online and not make decisions that make you uncomfortable. But that's a skill a lot of us still as adults don't have. Most of us do not like putting up boundaries that other people we care about don't like. So why would we expect a 13-year-old to be able to do it? Another example is impulse control. Teenagers, famously not good at it. So that's a skill we need to work on with them and talk about with them, right? And my colleague, Alejandra Monroy, gives this great example of, many of us have learned in the workplace, maybe don't send that workplace email that you want to send. Write it, enjoy writing it, and see if you still want to send it tomorrow. That is a lesson that some of us learned the hard way. Again, why do we expect 13-year-olds to have skills that many of us as adults don't have? We should not. We should be working with them and scaffolding these skills as part of our online safety initiatives and programs. So I'm going to fly through this. I don't want to take up the next speaker's time. We have a ton of resources. I know there's a resource table there set up today where you can grab physical copies of some of these things. And again, Tina will be there in person tomorrow, and she'll be doing a session tomorrow where she'll go into this more. But nicmec.org/netsmarts, we have everything you need. Completely scripted presentations, activities, videos kids can watch, games they can use, discussion starters for parents. I mean, it's all there in English and Spanish. Whatever you need, we probably have it. If you don't have it, reach out to us, and maybe it just wasn't obvious on the website, but we probably have it. And if you have a good idea, we'd love to hear it. Maybe we'll be able to make it totally free. I want to highlight quickly Into the Cloud in particular. This is a program around self-generated content, live streaming, suitable for kids 5 to 12. We got kids who are being victimized as young as 9 or 10. Guess what? We have to talk to them when they're 5 or 6. We have to talk to them about this stuff, and a lot of us are not comfortable. We're not doing it. We don't know what's the need. So that's what we need you to do, is go and tell people in your lives, professionally and personally, that this is something they need to talk about again, especially with those boys. And so this is very easy. There's really fun videos, games, discussion guides, teacher lesson plans, the whole shebang on the website for free. And then I think it's really important, this is a quote from one of our survivor consultants. As a kid, I was taught not to talk to strangers online, but I wasn't told what to do if I actually did. We've got to talk about reporting when we talk about prevention and intervening. This poster is available in the back of the room on the table. Tina will have it tomorrow too. We want it up in front of any kids we can in private spaces. This tells kids sextortion is the thing, and this is what we can do to help you with it. Content takedown. Very quickly, reporting the cyber tip line is the best way to get content off the internet. It allows us to label it legally as child pornography, and we can let platforms know if this is no child pornography. What I said earlier, they have to take it off their platform. We can contact them day over day and make sure it comes down. We add it to a list of identifying hash values and make that available to the platform, so anytime it pops up, it comes down immediately. However, the cyber tip line involves law enforcement. By necessity, it's how it works. The age verification has to come from law enforcement. So we have other options for kids to report content, for anyone to report content, if the cyber tip line report is not comfortable because of that law enforcement involvement. One of them is you can go on our website and we'll show you exactly how to contact each of these platforms and tell them this is an image of a minor, it needs to be flagged, it needs to come down. You can direct kids to the site to do that themselves if they prefer. A new service we just started called Take It Down. Kids can report content on their device and say, I'm a minor and this is an explicit picture of me. We don't even look at the picture. We don't get their name, we don't get the picture. We pull down that identifying information, and we have platforms participating voluntarily, and they will look for that identifying information, and if it pops up, they will flag it on their platforms. So this is really nice for kids who send an image and they're really not sure if it's online, they're worried it might be online, they don't want to make a cyber tip line report, they can go to takeitdown.org. This is available in a multitude of languages. It's an international resource for kids to report that self-generated content in an anonymous way. But that does help us get it flagged and hopefully get it down off the internet. We don't want to tell kids anymore that once something's on the internet, it's out there forever, because maybe not. We have really good technology to get this content down. And if you tell kids, once it's out there forever, why on earth would they embarrass themselves and come tell you about their explicit content on the internet? So we want to tell them we have lots of tools that we can use to support you and also to get your picture down. Just very briefly, we have services for parents and caregivers. You can refer to us, you can have them call us. We have peer support, we have mental health crisis assistance, we can support families long-term, help with legal referrals, all sorts of stuff. You can just give us a call on the hotline. We also have training, 20 minutes on sextortion. Everything I just explained about financial sextortion, you want to share it with your communities, 20-minute microlearning. That's appropriate for school counselors, teachers, parents, whoever. Introduction to child sex trafficking, working with victims of CSAM, all sorts of stuff on our free NCMEC Connect platform. So that's my 30 minutes. It is 2:33, so I feel like with the stoppage, I'm pretty close. All this information is up there, and I know the conference organizers have it, and as I said, go see Tina tomorrow. She'll be there to provide more information.
Thank you so much, Susan. Can you hear me?